And anytime that Christina, you have any specific questions, we'll try to go through as much of it as possible. But if you have any details or specific questions or just further input, just make sure to stop us and let us know, but we'll try to cover most of it, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Great, great. So welcome to our information session for our Certificate in Social Justice Leadership. I'm Kenny Taylor. I serve as an assistant professor here at the Bush School, and through our Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy, I'm also responsible for our certificates that we have in social justice leadership, the one that we're going to talk about today, but also for our certificate in nonprofit leadership. And we're happy to announce the launching of our certificate in fundraising leadership, which will start in March, so just next month. As far as our agenda for today, we're just going to talk about who we are as a center, our foundation's mission, values, and of course, our center staff here that's responsible for our continuing education program and delivery that we have here. We'll get into specifics about the program itself and timeline, and then the courses that make up the entire certificate for our social justice content. And then we'll also introduce you to the subject matter experts that lead each one of those courses. And Christina, like I mentioned, also we'll do questions and answers when we get toward the end, but it's a small group of us, so we'd be happy to take questions at any time. So who we are as the Bush School. So the Bush School is on the horizon next year of celebrating 25 years. And of course, our values align with those values of the Texas A&M University, that being excellence, respect, leadership, loyalty, integrity, and selfless service. And so all those years ago when the school was founded, President Bush certainly wanted to make a contribution to the public service space. And so we just usually lead out, if it's not his famous quote of public service being a noble calling, something else that he also mentioned is that he takes as his guide the hope of a saint, in crucial things unity, and in important things diversity. So diversity has always been a value of the school since our founding here. More specific to our Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy here at the school, we had, so since the founding of the school, we had a nonprofit program that was usually ranked as one of the best graduate schools in public affairs, specifically our nonprofit management. So we've been happy to hold that designation for several years. The Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy was stood up actually in 2017, and that was due to the leadership and the planning here at the school to evolve from having a long-term nonprofit management program specifically or exclusively for graduate students, and a natural next step, again, with planning of the leadership that was here at the school. Our director, Will Brown, has been at the school for several years, I think 15, 16 years, and it was mostly his planning to work in the direction of having an academic center who also specialized in nonprofit management and also philanthropy across the state and our local community, and of course, places across the United States as well too. When the mission was developed here specifically for the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy, it was really to support the nonprofit activity here in the state of Texas and beyond, and focusing on things like research, professional outreach, and engaged learning. The certificate programs that we started really speak more to our professional outreach. So reaching out into the communities, serving folks who work in nonprofit organizations, tends to be the role that I focus on as the Director of Outreach and Professional Development. Personally, I didn't stop to tell a lot about my background, but I came to the school as a practitioner, someone that served the nonprofit industry for more than 20 years, 12 of those years with Big Brothers Big Sisters in a variety of capacities. And then it was my goal at one point to transition into academia. So once I pursued my PhD in leadership studies, I conducted my research exclusively in the nonprofit environment, where I was really trying to identify tomorrow's leaders within nonprofit organizations, and then also research what that link might be of nonprofit leader behaviors to job satisfaction within nonprofit organizations. So I was really happy to join the team here at Texas A&M, specifically at the Bush School, for the history that they had as one of the best nonprofit programs in the United States. So we're really proud of that. And again, when we talk about our research, of course, we have several scholars here in the school that research on a variety of things, with a lot of focus on equity, whether it be equity and social justice issues, equity and diversity issues on boards, equity issues related to pay, gender equity. So we really, again, one reason I was really proud to be here at the school is we have a variety of scholars that focus on equity issues in a variety of capacities. And then our engaged learning with regard to our mission really has to do with the graduate students that we serve. So we try to engage them in a variety of ways outside of the classroom to where they can learn and have experiences that contribute to their education and what they learn in the classroom as well too. And I'll give you an example of that. So since it just happened yesterday, I led a training for the Chambers of Commerce here in the state of Texas. They all gathered here at Texas A&M University. It happened to bump into one of my class periods. And so I invited all my students over and they got to interact with CEOs and executive directors of Chambers of Commerce throughout the state. And they were really interested in things like generational differences in leadership. They were able to provide input as to their generation and how they think about leadership and what it would take to attract and sustain younger employees in that type of environment. So anytime that we have the chance to bring in speakers, invite them to trainings that we do with professionals out in the field, anything like that would fall into our engaged learning piece. Early on back in 2017, again, when we stood up or when our center was founded, we of course thought about our values as well. And when we thought about what we valued, of course, there's a value for nonprofit organizations. That's really what we're in business for, is to serve nonprofit organizations. When we say opportunity for all, one thing that I've been really passionate about that really, kind of goes into the design of our certificate for social justice leadership is that the opportunity for all to participate in the nonprofit sector is highly important. One of the things that we know that's out there, just when you look at the numbers, is for more than 30 years now, because I was that same person. And so this was something that was heavy on my heart for many years. It's just when you look at the demographics alone, we know that there's not many people of color that are engaged in leadership roles at nonprofit organizations, nor as executive leaders with nonprofit organizations. And so what does that mean when we know a majority of nonprofit organizations are serving in communities of color? And so one has to question that idea of, are nonprofit organizations really providing the best service that they can to the communities that they serve, when we know that upwards of 85% of all board members, board chairs, and executives at nonprofit organizations basically are white people. And so when we look at our frontline staff, that tends to be where we see more people of color that occupy roles that usually don't fall in the decision-making space. And so even though there's not a lot of research in this area, I mean, there's more and more having to do with people of color who lead organizations that don't have the appropriate funding and things like that. So really what we're trying to do is to educate folks around that, make a contribution in the space. And so again, when we thought about our values early on, we stood up or developed the center, we thought that opportunity for all is really what speaks to our particular emphasis on diversity. Down from there, when we say board governance, I mentioned to you the director of our center, Will Brown. He was someone that I was familiar with his research when I was working on my research, and has a long history of thinking about diversity from board level. And that goes back more than 20 years of his interest in that space. And he's known as one of, the experts in that research area of board governance for many years. So we also had to look at what expertise that we actually have in our center as well too. And so board governance is absolutely one of those values for us as a center. And then leadership, of course, because that speaks to more my background. I mentioned that I have a PhD in leadership, and my research is, even though it's in leadership studies, the emphasis of it itself is really how do I translate those leadership studies and leadership theories that have mostly been developed in a corporate environment and what that means in a nonprofit environment. And then I spoke a little earlier about the engaged learning. And so that engagement piece of, we're not just in our offices. I mean, as a land grant university, Texas A&M is responsible for serving in the communities that we operate in. And so that engagement is local, across the state, and of course, in many places around the world. So engagement is highly important to us as well, too. Welcome to you, Kimberlane. We know that you jumped in, but welcome. We wanted to say hello to you and thank you for joining us. If I could put you on the spot, maybe have you introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming in from and how you learned about our webinar today.
Sure, thank you, and apologies for my tardiness. I am Kimberlane Banks, and I am the Business Engagement Officer at Communities Foundation of Texas in Dallas. My work at CFT is to help businesses connect their corporate social responsibility and environmental, social, and governance activities and strategy to real work in the community, partnering with nonprofit organizations. And sitting in a community foundation, we have a really unique position to be able to do that. I don't remember where I saw this, but I was like, I'm in. I also, in addition to working at CFT, am a founding partner in a consultancy with 30 partners now called Diversity Crew, and we do equity, inclusion, and belonging work with corporations, government, and academia.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. I mentioned a little earlier, our other guest that we have today is Andy York, and he's actually one of the participants who went through our social justice program. And he has a really great story just in terms of the types of work that he does here in our local community and some of his takeaways from the program and how he was thinking about diversity at his organization. So Andy's with us and he'll certainly chime in a little bit later. But the same way I opened before you joined us, and no worries, because it's a small group of us, is if at any time, if there's something that we didn't explain well enough, or you have other questions or additional questions, just feel free to jump in and ask at that given time so we don't have to wait till the end. But let me introduce you to the rest of our team as well too. I told you a little bit about myself. Rebecca Bergner is our Assistant Director of Continuing and Professional Education, and also Paige Burleson is our Program Coordinator. So I'll let them introduce themselves as well real quick.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Bergner, and I just recently acquired this role, so it's really odd to hear my name as Assistant Director. So, but at the same time, I'm excited to work with Kenny and Paige. I've been working with the center actually quite a long time in a different role, but hopefully now we can concentrate on making sure that these courses and this information is put out to the public. So, Paige.
I'm Paige Burleson. I recently just started as well. I've been there, I guess, about 3 weeks now. Very different role than what I'm used to. I was in the ag sector doing my master's there. And so this was something that was still along the lines of education. And I'm hoping that it brings me some experience to help me further in my career.
And so Rebecca came over from our Office of Extended Ed, which really focuses on all of the Bush Schools online programs. And early on, 2 years ago, when we launched our first certificate in nonprofit leadership, Rebecca, we really worked hand in hand to develop that program and to launch it. So she has a much bigger role than maybe she relayed, and was, vital to us kind of, starting down this path of providing continuing education out to folks in the state and our local community. And actually several folks from out of state as well have been interested in our program. So I welcome both Rebecca and Paige to the team, and we're ready to do more work and reach out to more people. So again, we thank you both for joining us today. So, why a certificate in social justice? The purpose of the certificate, I think I alluded to it a little earlier, is to provide nonprofit professionals with the tools to transform systems and structures at nonprofit organizations and public organizations to become more equitable. I touched on it a little earlier. I mean, for a long time now, I mean, I followed some of the research out there. In the last 4 years, we've seen those numbers get a little better. But before the last 4 years, that's tracked pretty well, that data that I mentioned to you just a little earlier for the past 30 years. I mean, when we look at the research of who occupies leadership roles at nonprofit organizations, the honest answer is not people of color. And again, those numbers hover around 85% of executives and CEOs who run or lead nonprofit organizations, and 90% of board members, and around 84% of board chairs. And even one of the things when I worked in the industry, I mentioned to you, 12 years with Big Brothers Big Sisters. I rarely, when I first started in the early 90s as a practitioner, saw anyone who looked like me. And of course, I was just starting out as an undergraduate student, but I rarely came across anyone who occupied management or leadership roles within nonprofit organizations over the years that I spent with that organization. And as a student, I usually tell the story that as a younger person in the industry, I didn't really think about it that way. Of course, I was just kind of happy to have a job, but never did I think that something like that would persist for more than 30 years. And so now on the academic side, that's a real issue. I mean, we look at the research and the research is, fairly clear. We know that nonprofit organizations serve in communities of color. The majority of them do. And usually those numbers hover around 40% or to 50% of clients usually are people of color. And so one has to question, again, some of the decision-making of what happens in organizations like that. And is there a way that nonprofits can better serve those communities? And when we've looked at organizations that are, say, more culturally and racially diverse, I mean, there's a few things that tend to stick out from the academic literature. And the literature usually speaks to those organizations being more innovative. One thing that I experienced personally, I used to be the CEO for Big Brothers Big Sisters in Austin. That was the last 4 years of the 12 years that I spent with that organizations. I mean, there was real hesitancy to walk into businesses that were owned by people of color to try to fundraise. And I think it had a lot to do with people just being uncomfortable and walking in those environments, especially when we say had an all-white board or a board that only had one person of color or two people of color. So we know that organizations that are more diverse, again, this is just straight from academic literature. This isn't, Kenny's perspective, is that usually those organizations are better positioned to fundraise and raise more money at those organizations. And then the one that I hone in on that I think just kind of makes sense as a talking point really has to do with just better serving the communities that you're responsible for. If you're putting your mission first, and your mission is to do as much of your mission as possible, serving people, organizations that are more diverse typically find more innovative ways to serve the populations that they are responsible for. So our certificate kind of revolves around some key elements. One is, it's not to harp on there needs to be this immediate change, and our perspective that we take is why this has persisted for so long really has to do with some systemic issues and structural issues that are really hard to fight if no one is paying attention to it. So what we want in terms of those that we look for that are thinking about a program like ours is, the first thing is really to become aware of what the real situation is when we generally think about why a social justice program. And so we certainly want to educate and build knowledge of, cultural and racial inequities within nonprofit organizations. And then nothing is going to happen if folks don't take some inventory of, what's going on and why does that look the way, or why does this happen in practice at our organization? So then what do students need to generally understand about barriers to inclusion in nonprofit organizations? The other piece is then taking some action. And so, I clearly said from the beginning of the development of this program, we don't want to, just educate people about what's going on. We're really looking for people that are willing to take a step forward, to take some action as far as what can you do to potentially change some of the systemic stuff. In the classes that we have, we tend to introduce things around, policies and procedures. And, when I go out and work with organizations these days, the first thing that I'll go to is policies and procedures that they have about being more inclusive at their organizations. And of course, there's many times that we don't find any policies on this stuff. What responsibilities do they have for executive directors to identify people of color that potentially could rise in the ranks? How do they generally, develop people in their organization for leadership roles? What do your pay policies look like? Hiring policies look like? The one that's really disturbing that we know just kind of, persists and people usually don't have an answer for is, what about when a person of color experiences something negative at your organization? And what do you do about it? Is there any set standard as to, how you even address something that a person of color experienced that was negative, racist? I mean, how do we address those things? And my experience has been that usually organizations don't even have policies that address things like that. Another level that you could also go to as well is we have folks in our classes, if you don't find pieces within policies or practices or procedures at organizations, many organizations have strategic plans. Well, how does that organization specifically address what equity or inclusion or diversity looks like within their strategic plans? That might be another place to look at an organization as to what that means. All the way down to even something like, is this something that you even talk about at a board level? I mean, the same research that I mentioned a little earlier to you in terms of what the demographics look like, those same studies say that it's not that boards aren't interested in prioritizing diversity, but then when you get to the question of what are you doing about it, that tends to be where organizations falter. It's important to us, say that out loud, but then what are we doing about it? Not a lot of action. So we really want people, because that's what we feel like we're preparing them for, is to introduce some things about what's going on. Folks that would then be interested in going back and taking inventory of what they see in their organizations, and then those that are also looking to take actions. And even though it's pitched that way, and that's actually who we're looking for, we've certainly had some feedback that that's tough for some folks, because we've had folks that are undergraduate students all the way up to CEOs of organizations to even have those conversations, or how to start those conversations. Is pretty interesting. And so kind of what I think that I've done when I go out and speak to folks is, we do all these amazing things at nonprofit organizations. We're great at fundraising. We're great at having these flashy or fancy strategic management plans. We're good at board governance, but we tend to leave out the equity piece. And so we have to get to a point to where we're talking about this stuff, we're taking some action, and we're trying to make it as routine as those other pieces that we're also responsible for when we think about board governance at these organizations. And so it's been fun to kind of go down this path. That's not to present this in a way to where we feel like we know it all, because we certainly don't. We're learning as we go. But when we thought about what type of contribution, again, that we want to make, our contribution is trying to empower folks to take some action at the end of the day. So how long does the program take to complete, and what a timeline looks like? So our certificate basically runs an academic semester, or just a bit longer than that. So in approximately 4 months, start to finish, one can earn their certificate in social justice leadership. So you see the courses that we have here. We have an introduction to cultural competency, managing diversity in the workplace, social justice policy and establishing partnerships, social justice leadership at nonprofit organizations, and leading diversity and equity within public service. So again, 5 courses. I'll talk a little bit more about them, but they're basically 3 weeks at a time. So we introduction to cultural competency, 3 weeks, 1 week in between. And then we start the second course, 3 weeks, 1 week in between, and so on. The program is online, weekly modules is the primary makeup of those courses. And then, so let's just say if you could imagine, I think the courses, Rebecca, you can correct me if I'm wrong, do they actually open up on Wednesdays or Tuesdays? Wednesdays?
Wednesday.
Okay, so if you could imagine at your convenience on a Wednesday, the first course, Introduction to Cultural Competency, would open up, and then at your own time, you can respond to discussion questions that we've embedded in our online platform, assignments that you have to address, things like that. And then you work yourself from Wednesday to Monday, and then we have an optional virtual office hours where myself or whoever our other subject matter experts are, I'll introduce you to them here in just a few, to visit and talk about the assignments from that week, or what usually comes up quite a bit. This is what I'm experiencing at my organization. This is some new article that I came across. This is something that I was told by a coworker, a board member, whoever it might be, in response to this question that I had to pose to them based on the assignment that we have from that week. And so the once a week virtual hours that we have are really just a way to for us to develop a relationship with our participants, for our participants to have access to our in-house, experts, or those that are serving as the instructor for a particular class. And what I found more than anything with these programs is that collectively, you kind of establish a nice networking group online with some of the scenarios that are posed to you. So you develop your own relationships as well too. And it's just nice to meet, people in a face-to-face environment. Those are optional. We of course encourage you to be there if you can, but we certainly understand that this is primarily an online program. We just want to be there for you. And our feedback so far has been really good around meeting on those Mondays evenings for 1 hour to have a session to where we can kick things around. Maybe before I get into the introductions of our subject matter experts, any questions from either of you two so far? Okay, I'll keep going. So I introduced myself, Kenny Taylor. My course on the introduction to social justice leadership at nonprofits. So again, serving as the director of outreach and professional development here at the school, I tend to kick off that first course just to try to provide a framework like I'm doing today of, how do we open up the course? How do we think about social justice? Because people think about social justice in, a variety of ways. And I think I went through that. How we're thinking about it is that the numbers say this, we need to change that. And how can we take action to do so? And so really it's to look at the inequities at nonprofit organizations that have just contributed over the years to a lack of leaders of color. I mean, I go out and I do research in this space, and it's, some of the news is really sad. I mean, as someone who's been in the industry for, ever since an undergraduate, I mean, this is something that I feel like I dedicated my life to as a student, that I said I wanted to serve others, particularly youth. I grew up without my father. It was important to me. I went to school to be an accountant. That didn't work for me. friend of mine said, man, I think you'd be really good at social work. I found the social work department, and it's just something that stuck with me. And then I pursued it before I, finished my undergraduate degree, all through graduate school, all through the time that I worked on my PhD, really gave my life to kind of this industry, if you will. And so this has been on my mind for a while. I'm really proud to be in a place to where I get to offer a program like this. There's something that, I contributed to developing and really try to, again, make a contribution to potentially changing some of that over the years. So this needs to change. Some folks will go to, well, if it does change, is there a business case? Because we've kind of been through that era of, folks wanted a business case as to why it makes sense to have more people of color in leadership roles at nonprofit organizations. And for that, of course, just go straight to the research, like I mentioned some of those things earlier as to why it makes sense. And, people aren't going to not be in need. And if that remains in communities of color, we need some diversity there. There needs to be some equity there. And the piece that's disappointing that I meant to mention a little earlier is in some of the research that I've done, and what I'm seeing is if we don't have people of color that are in decision-making roles at nonprofit organizations, if they feel that their contributions aren't valued as a frontline worker that aspires in the direction, say like maybe I did over my career, or say like you all have done over the course of your career, then they think about leaving or not participating in the public service space, or they think about not being a volunteer. They don't want to do it if they feel that they aren't valued, or that they don't have the opportunity to rise through the ranks to lead a nonprofit organization. And then the other population of people seem to be starting their own organizations. So what I certainly don't want to see is people get discouraged, people of color get discouraged about the opportunities that are out there to participate in the world of public service. Back to the opportunity for all. Everyone should be able to contribute in this space, especially. Mason Alexander is our subject matter expert for our social and racial justice and leading diversity and equity and inclusion. Mason is a former Bush School student who is now working on her PhD and has really taken to the idea of contributions of people of color in the disaster space and nonprofits' contributions and hazard and disasters and recovery and reduction. And so we're really happy to have her as well. But her course is empowering individuals around some practical skills of building inclusive workplaces and leading diverse teams, and how you get folks to prioritize equity in their organizations. Dutchess Humphrey is a subject matter expert on cultural competence. Her perspective there, I followed that research a bit myself, is that nonprofit practitioners need to implement culturally appropriate strategies aligned to engage with a variety of people in workplaces. And the way that I look at this, or the research that I've looked at in this area, really has to do with, I think, one question, and that question is back to kind of the perspective I mentioned from a little earlier. We're good at all these things as leaders, but are we also effective at managing and leading people that have different cultural backgrounds and different racial backgrounds than we do? And some of that research kind of alludes to, if you don't have that skill set as well as all of your other great skill sets, then something is certainly left out of your leadership makeup, if you will. So really what the cultural competency stuff has to do with is how effective are you working in that space of managing and leading people of other cultures and of other races. So that's an interesting space for me as well too. Dr. Frank Ashley is another of our subject matter experts, and Dr. Ashley serves as our senior associate dean here at the Bush School and has worked in diversity for a number of years. He talks about human differences and how they're relevant in organizations, the advantages and challenges of diversity in the workplace and managerial strategies. Dr. Ashley's class, it doesn't steer away from the cultural and racial piece, but it's more broad to include disabilities and things like that, gender. His is a really good class to kind of provide a holistic view of how we need to be thinking about diversity as well too, from a management standpoint, not just culture, not just racial, but a variety of other pieces as well too that make sense when we generally think about equity. Terry Brossard is an instructor, one of our subject matter experts. That action piece is really what her course is. And that's identifying a public policy issue and how to begin an issue-based campaign to create social justice movement. So we said early on in the presentation that we really want, in the end, for people to take some action. And so I mentioned the diversity that we've had in the folks that have been through our social justice program. We weren't sure ourselves if we wanted, say, an undergraduate student in our program, but after I visited with her for a while, her stance was, I'm interested in this, I'm planning to go into the public service space, and anything that I can do to help prepare myself for how to work in a culturally rich environment would be helpful. And then I was like, and she's younger too, she might have some great perspective, and she really contributed hard. I think she was with Andy in that cohort, so I'm sure he can speak to that as well too. But that movement, doing something after it's over with, questions that you would ask at your organization. How can we get better? Here's what I'm seeing. Being able to have those conversations in a confident way where no one is, say, turned off, but again, everybody doesn't know how to talk about this stuff. And so we hope that we're empowering people that are ready, able, and willing to take on these conversations at organizations. So we're really happy to have Terry Brossard as well too. Andy, I know you're there. I sent some questions over to you, but I didn't really even have to do that because you're the one that went through the program. And I asked you to be here because you had a really interesting take early on of how you were thinking about equity and inclusion and justice issues at your organization before joining our program. And after having a conversation, I was really happy that you jumped in and was part of the program. So I'm going to open it up and give the floor to you. And if you wouldn't mind, to Kimberlane and to Christina, and for all of us to hear kind of what your experience like. And now that you're done with the program, just tell us about what your experience was.
Sure thing. I'm happy to share. I'm driving and I'll park in just a second and turn my video on. So leading up to this course being offered, I was a community partner board member on the United Way board, and United Way, their national organization, had put out some directives that diversity be addressed at the local level. And so it was really cool for me to get to be part of that experience as they led up to that. And it was something that Habitat International had not really begun talking about. And so with the events of the last few years, this is a topic that's gotten more important to me personally and kind of across the nation. And as the executive director of Habitat and being a white man, it was something that I didn't feel as qualified as I would like to be a leader in. And so when I think as soon as I saw the email come through that it was being offered, I responded to this and signed up right away. And I got to thank the technical people over at the Bush School because I signed up for the wrong thing and they helped me out. Then I had trouble logging in and they helped me out there too. So anyway, the support is good. So some of the things I got out of this, and probably the immediate pieces that really stuck out to me was that spending money and spending time to do this for my organization gave me a really good reason to talk to my executive committee on the board about these issues. It had come up a little bit before, after George Floyd's death, when we made some social media posts and, we publicly put on our stuff that Black Lives Matter. And we got a little pushback from a couple board members. And then we worked it out and decided, well, thank you for sharing your opinion. That's what you're supposed to do as a board member, and we disagree with you. But so the assignment in the first week was to talk with, I talked with my board president, who is a Hispanic man and is with Wells Fargo. And it was a conversation that we had never had, but he had such good insights to share with me. And Wells Fargo has a very robust diversity program. And so he was able to tell me about some of the things they do, give me some ideas. And so it really spurred these conversations that were just very positive, that got us on a good track. The other thing that's been a challenge for us is diversity on our board. And so for a while, we have tried to recruit people of color for board roles, but it's just been like, well, we have a goal to do that. And so one of the concepts that came up was, does your board match the racial composition of your service area? And so then that provided some kind of objective criteria that we could shoot for and say, well, these are the percentages. It's not just a goal we have or numbers we're making up, but we can make this the goal that we work towards and give us, instead of just something to do, but give us something to actually work towards with the goal. And then the other thing was with hiring, as we're going through the classes, we get to examine, well, what is the composition of our staff and our board, et cetera. And if it's not where we want it to be, why not? What are the factors that lead to more white people being on staff? And so as we were going through those discussions, we had a staff position open up that we were interviewing for. And so I was able to use some of the strategies that was basically keep interviewing until you have top candidates that are people of color, that represent the diversity you want. And then from there, choose the best one. And so we were able to do that. Specifically, the top candidates were a Arabic man, a Black man of Hispanic descent that spoke Spanish, a white woman, and a white trans non-binary person. And of those four, one self-deselected, the other one was at the bottom of the list. And then between the two, we went with the trans person, which was a very new experience for me, for my staff. And it's been phenomenal. And I think that going through diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions before that process gave me the tools to lead that hiring team through those issues. And while we wind up hiring a white person, we feel good about that. Wasn't a default thing. That was something that person wound up being the best candidate, but we wanted to make sure we were doing our best to be equitable. And we did some new things where we posted the job in places we've never done before, to try and attract people that maybe weren't seeing our job or weren't feeling comfortable. So between staff composition and future hiring decisions and board composition and the way we recruit and talk about our goals, those have been immediate changes that I feel have benefited our local habitat.
Thanks so much, Andy. I appreciate you sharing that. It seems like we also had a conversation about you were sharing some of the materials and pieces that you were going through with boards, with your board, and also with other local nonprofits as well too. Is that?
I have, yeah. So I put out an email to my staff and said, hey, who wants to be on a committee that focus on this? Got a few responses from people that were interested. And in this sort of topic, that's the people I want to work with. And so we had some tools that we went through as a staff that I had gone to a workshop with United Way also and done it. And it was a really, both times that I did that, fantastic conversation. It was a good, safe way to hear different perspectives from different people, learn some things that probably wouldn't have come up in conversation otherwise, that were good to know and help us understand each other. And I think it helps for those people that weren't as interested in this, it helps open the door to them thinking about the topic differently and seeing value in those discussions, and gives them a way to frame that idea moving forward in a more positive light, where maybe they'll be interested when I ask the next time.
That's one of the things that I've also seen, not Andy, with you and also others who've echoed the same, is we feel like in every one of the courses, I mean, generally speaking, what we try to do, the framework for our social justice certificate, it's a little different, but from the beginning, when we developed these types of offerings, it was to introduce a topic, go deeper, and here's a resource tool, now go do something. And so it's fun when we receive the feedback that the resource tools that are provided within the classrooms, that folks use them. And so I've heard that comment echoed that, hey, I shared this with my board and it led to some conversations at our board that we hadn't been talking about. And so that's exactly what we wanted to do. That's exactly the type of contribution that we wanted to make in terms of some of those tools that we have, that they're being distributed and discussed and maybe addressing things that in a way that maybe organizations hadn't in the past. I know we want to respect your time, and I think that's the bulk of what we have to present, but I certainly want to make sure that we go through this information basically really quick. I want to make sure that whether Kimberly or Christina, if you have questions, to just open it up. And I know we all have flexibility to kind of hang for however, but one question that we've received, can I enroll in one course at a time? And the answer is yes. Quite honestly, when we developed this certificate, the sequence of 5 courses, we also make them available if folks just have a specific interest in one particular class. Is that an option? The answer is yes. At the same time, I will tell you, we haven't had many folks take us up on that. People are choosing the certificate. I'll give you one example where we did have, this is in one of our other certificates, our nonprofit leadership certificate. We have a strategic management course in there. And so we have a nonprofit organization that was going through a strategic planning process. And in advance of that process, they thought that that would be a good course for them to take. And so 4 or 5 of them from that organization signed up exclusively for that course. So is it an option? Yes, absolutely there for folks to do that. How do you enroll? We have our site there to register, but you can go to that link and register, and I think we'll drop that in the chat for you. But if you also have additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to Paige, Rebecca, or myself. We have Paige's email there as well too, and we'll drop that one in the chat for you as well. But with that said, I think I mentioned the 3 certificates that we have. The certificate in fundraising leadership is our newest certificate that will also launch in March as well. We haven't done that one yet. The certificate in nonprofit leadership and the social justice leadership, we have ran those and feel really good about where they're at. So that all said, certainly want to open it up for Kimberly or Christina. Can we answer anything else for you or perspective? We'd love to know what you're thinking about.
So I love that you created this program. I think this is so cool and so necessary. I'm not new to the world. So
Right.
I've been around a lot of minutes, and I've had a lot of lived experience that absolutely underlines everything that you just shared. I'm so excited to think about my younger colleagues and what this could present for them. My one question, because I'm in the nonprofit world, as are all of the people that I would recommend this to, is there any financial support available?
Yeah, we've done that. Yeah, so if we have an organization, that's something that you can contact us directly
Like
about.
if we were going to send a group of people, there might be a way to get it. Okay. Good.
Absolutely, we have that on there. I think it's a 10% for a minimum of 3 people.
Okay.
But again, if you reach out to us personally, we can certainly negotiate that, and we're also always happy to bring in groups. But we do absolutely, yes.
It's so necessary. I love that it actually exists. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. What else?
So this is Christina, and I just wanted to echo the comments. Thank you so much for even having this opportunity. I really appreciated hearing from Andy. So thank you, Andy, for sharing with such candor and such insightful reflection on your experience and that practical application. My question, and you kind of spoke to this, Andy, my board has been in a lot of transition lately. I came on as the CEO in June 2020. So we all know what the climate was like in a lot of ways in June 2020. And I am the first Black woman to lead the organization and the first external hire in 45 years to lead the organization. And in the community, there is a perceived notion, which kind of seeps into the board at some level with some of my board members who are still there, that social justice is a political buzzword phrase that really means anti-government, anti-law enforcement, everything negative. When they hear social justice, they immediately go to a completely different place. So I am wondering, and I'm sure that you all have something that I could present to them so that when this option is put before them, because I'm very much interested in pursuing the opportunity at this time, to explain to them what it really is, if that makes sense.
I'll chime in. I don't recall anything offhand that was the document like that, but when you said that, it got me to thinking, and those anti-government, anti-police things are focused on stopping the actions that we think are wrong. And I think social justice is more about doing the things that are right, and stopping the things that are wrong are part of that. But it's I feel like it's a proactive, positive thing, and not just stop the bad.
Yeah, and Christina, I mean, that was one reason why we really wanted to frame up the Bush School's perspective, our perspective of what social justice means in this case, because I mean, people define it in a lot of different ways. And so I think I hear your point. I just offer up just briefly is just to say, we think about social justice in terms of more diversity in those who work at organizations to better serve the communities that you have to reach out for to aspire toward or advance your mission at your organization. And I think Andy also mentioned just taking a close look. So who is the community that you serve? What do they look like? Who are they made up of? And can we aspire toward, whether it's the demographics on our board and also the demographics on our staff, can we do something better to diversify our organizations to try to match that? And that might be tough in some communities, but to even have or think about that conversation. I'm unaware of your situation, but the way that you framed it up, it might be tough. But I would certainly offer, if you ever needed if you were personally thinking about this and it maybe took for someone else to kind of explain, well, what is that you're getting into? I think I'd certainly be happy to try to provide some perspective for those folks if you wanted to have me do so.
Well, I certainly appreciate that offer. I think it's definitely less of a challenge now. I have the full support of the executive committee on the board, which is important. The board has a couple of people who are still hanging in there from the original board that very much, I think, will probably ask the question. But knowing that I have the support already of the executive committee, I'm less concerned about it. I think it's interesting, though, that when something was said about social justice issues and how our organization should not be delving into those waters. That's what was said to me about a year ago after a Facebook post went up. And so I went back to the original job posting when they were hiring for my role. And I said to the board in the meeting, you all said in the job posting, you wanted someone who was knowledgeable of social justice issues. So did you know what you were asking for, or what did you mean when you asked that? Because it was written in the job description. And they all kind of looked at each other like, well, we didn't know that was in there. And they are the ones who developed the job posting. So it was interesting because I also think that knowing the composition of the board that I inherited at that time, they very much wanted to look like they were on board with diversity and inclusion. They wanted to look the part, but that was it. They didn't really want any action to support that. So, it was interesting to me. I thought, yeah, you guys probably thought it sounded good to say that when you posted for this position, but then when you see what that actually looks like and what that really means, then it's problematic. So for example, when I came in, the entire leadership team was made up of white women in the organization. And then there was me, at the top of the org chart. And so, when I started looking at what the organization really needed to move forward, it was some very difficult conversations that had to take place. And those white women at the top of the organization were all uneducated. None of them even had bachelor's degrees. And I was like, this is a problem. And this is a problem to potential funders that we're reaching out to. It's a problem. And I don't think they really knew what they asked for, is the bottom line. They didn't know what they were asking for when they said, we want someone to take this organization to the next level. And I've been very, very adamant about, we can't get to the next level the way that we were. And so the leadership team now looks very, very different. Overall, our board looks very different. Our board was all white and had one Hispanic person on it when I started. It now looks different. We still have work to do, but I think that right now, this is the critical time because I have a board chair who totally gets it and totally sees the need for change. As a white woman, she is on board. The executive committee is on board. And I've got an internal leadership team that understands and is on board. So I feel like I need to do this now for the good of the order, if you will.
Sounds like it. Yeah, because that time could easily pass without a lot of movement, and then you get stuck. So we totally get that for sure. Yeah, that's excellent.
But this has been super helpful. I definitely appreciate it. And I'm just ready to move forward.
Sounds good. Well, I think you obviously found this and you have our information. We'd love to have you, that's for sure. So along the way or leading right up to that point, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us on our team. And we'll certainly respond and help you get registered, okay?
Sounds good. And thank you, Paige and Rebecca, both, and Andy as well. Again, thank you so much. It's nothing like hearing from peer to peer, right? So I really, really appreciate that, Andy.
Yeah, and that's what I said. That's why the cohort model is so cool online, because even without us that are instructors for the course, we've really seen those cohorts establish great relationships with one another, and to be able to discuss even what you just introduced there, to be able to introduce that out to the group and maybe how they've responded to some of those situations that may have been similar. We've learned a lot ourselves. So that's really fun to hear, and the types of things that we would want you to share to contribute to the makeup of the group learning, if you will.
Christina, if I can add, if you've got some colleagues in your area that you think might enjoy this, reach out to them and see if they want to do it when you do it. There were 2 people in Bryan College Station that took the classes when I did. One of them I've been friends with for years, and the other one I met through the class. But I really enjoyed having people that were here in town to bounce these ideas off of. And now I've got 2 people that I know that are professionals in nonprofits that I can talk to and share ideas, and we can be a resource for each other. So if you're thinking about doing it and you know some people that would be interested, I think there's a lot of value in that community in your own local area that can do this together.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Andy, appreciate you, man, as always. Thanks to Rebecca and Paige, and Christina, it's very nice to meet you. And we'll look for you in just a few weeks, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, you too. Thanks.